What would you do if you discovered that the abandoned mansion you purchased contained secrets so dark they had been deliberately erased from local history? Have you ever wondered what lurks in the forgotten corners of old southern estates? Those grand houses where the walls themselves seem to hold their breath, keeping century-old secrets locked away from prying eyes. In the sweltering summer of 1906, while laborers worked to renovate the once magnificent Hargrove estate on the outskirts of Savannah, Georgia, no one could have predicted the macabre discovery that would shake the foundations of local society and expose a darkness that many powerful families had worked diligently to conceal. What began as a routine renovation project would eventually uncover one of the most disturbing cases in Georgia's history. A case so horrifying that court records were sealed, newspaper accounts suppressed, and witnesses mysteriously relocated or silenced. The Hargrove Estate, a sprawling antebellum mansion built in 1842 by cotton magnate Thaddeus Hargrove, had stood abandoned for nearly 15 years following the mysterious disappearance of the last heir, Eleanor Hargrove, in 1891. The property had fallen into disrepair, its once manicured gardens now overgrown with kudzu and wild azaleas, its white columns stained with mildew and moss. Local children whispered stories of ghosts wandering the grounds at night, pale figures with long, flowing hair that seemed to float between the ancient live oaks draped in Spanish moss. In April 1906, the estate was purchased at auction by Franklin Mercer, a northern industrialist who had made his fortune in textiles and was looking to establish a presence in the South. Mercer intended to restore the mansion to its former glory and use it as both a summer home and a place to entertain business associates. "I saw tremendous potential in the property," Mercer would later write in a letter to his brother. Despite its condition, the bones of the house were sound, and there was a certain character to the place that newer constructions simply cannot replicate. "I was told the property came with a history, but in Savannah, what grand old house doesn't have its share of stories?" Renovation work began on May 12th, with a crew of 20 workers, mostly local men in need of steady employment, supervised by Mercer's trusted foreman, William Hayes. The initial work focused on structural repairs, clearing the grounds, and assessing what could be salvaged from the original furnishings left behind when the property was abandoned. For the first few weeks, the work progressed smoothly. The grounds were cleared, rotting wood replaced, and the exterior was prepared for a fresh coat of paint. It wasn't until the workers began to tackle the mansion's third floor that the first signs of something amiss appeared. Hayes documented the first unusual finding in his daily work report on June 3rd. Discovered unusual alterations to the east wing of the third floor. Wall appears to have been constructed to seal off approximately 15 feet of the hallway, not on original house plans. We'll investigate tomorrow. The following day, Hayes and 3 workers removed the relatively new wall, which had been carefully papered to match the rest of the hallway, making it appear to be original to anyone unfamiliar with the house's layout. Behind this wall, they discovered a narrow corridor leading to what had once been a large storage room. The door to the room was secured with 3 separate locks, reported Hayes, unusual for a storage area. Upon opening, we found the room entirely empty, save for a single large steamer trunk positioned in the center of the floor. The trunk was an expensive piece, crafted of leather-bound cedar with brass fittings and locks that had been sealed with wax bearing an unfamiliar crest. Hayes, sensing something unusual about the find, sent the workers away and summoned Mercer to the property. Mercer arrived the following morning. In his personal journal, later seized as evidence, he recorded the events of that fateful day. June 5th, 1906. Hayes telegraphed about a discovery requiring my personal attention. Arrived at the estate at 9 a.m. to find him waiting on the 3rd floor. The hidden room he showed me was troubling enough. Someone had gone to considerable expense and effort to conceal it, but it was the trunk that immediately filled me with unease. It was locked, but something about it suggested it should remain that way. Perhaps it was the faint, sweet, sickly odor emanating from it, or perhaps some intuition. Against my better judgment, I instructed Hayes to open it. What Hayes and Mercer discovered upon opening that trunk would haunt them both until their dying days. Inside, carefully arranged and preserved, were the bodies of 3 young women. Unlike typical corpses, these had not decomposed significantly, despite evidence suggesting they had been dead for many years. They were dressed in identical white gowns of fine cotton, their skin unnaturally preserved and taking on the appearance of yellowed parchment stretched over bone. Most disturbing of all was the manner in which they had been arranged. The 3 women, clearly sisters from their striking similarity in features, had been positioned facing each other in a triangle. Their extraordinarily long hair, which must have reached their ankles when alive, had been used to bind them together. Each sister's hands were tied with her own hair, while their necks were bound together with braids created from the hair of all 3, connecting them in death, as they had presumably been in life. "I have seen death before," Mercer wrote, "on battlefields during the war and in the aftermath of factory accidents. But this was something else entirely. There was an artfulness to it, a deliberate arrangement that suggested ritual rather than mere murder." Hayes vomited upon seeing it. "I nearly did the same." Hayes immediately sent for the local authorities. By mid-afternoon, the Chatham County Sheriff, Thomas Wilkins, had arrived with 2 deputies. Upon viewing the contents of the trunk, Sheriff Wilkins ordered the property sealed and telegraphed for additional assistance from the state authorities. The initial examination conducted by Dr. James Thornton, the county medical examiner, yielded several disturbing observations. His official report, later partially redacted before being entered into court records, contained the following. Subjects appear to be 3 female individuals, estimated ages between 17 and 22 years. Remarkable preservation of the remains suggests treatment with unknown chemical preservatives. Time of death difficult to establish due to preservation, but estimated at not less than 10 years prior to discovery. No immediate cause of death visible on external examination. No signs of violence, except for unusual markings carved into the skin of each victim's forehead, symbols of unknown origin or significance. Hair unusually long and showing no signs of decay, used to create elaborate bindings connecting the 3 bodies. Preliminary conclusion: deaths resulting from deliberate act with possible ritualistic elements. News of the discovery spread quickly through Savannah, despite efforts by local authorities to keep it quiet. By the following day, crowds of curious onlookers had gathered at the edges of the Hargrove property, held back by a hastily established police line. The Savannah Morning News ran a front-page story on June 7th with the headline, "Grisly Discovery at Hargrove Estate. 3 unidentified women found dead." The article was notably restrained in its details, mentioning only that 3 female bodies had been discovered during renovation work. By the afternoon edition, however, this story had been replaced with one about city improvements, and no further mention of the Hargrove discovery appeared in subsequent issues. This sudden silence from the press was the first indication of the influence being exerted to suppress information about the case. Later investigations would reveal that the newspaper's owner had received visits from several prominent Savannah families on the morning of June 7th, after which all copies of the morning edition were recalled and staff were instructed not to discuss the story. The investigation initially focused on identifying the 3 women. Their remarkable resemblance to each other suggested they were sisters, and their fine clothing indicated they came from wealth. Sheriff Wilkins assigned Deputy Marshal Cooper to examine missing persons reports from the surrounding counties going back 20 years. Cooper's search led him to a report filed in 1893 by Harold Whitmore, a businessman from Charleston, regarding his 3 nieces who had traveled to Savannah to visit relatives and never returned. The report had been investigated at the time, but was closed after local authorities received a letter, supposedly from the eldest niece, claiming they had decided to continue their travels to New Orleans and would be staying there indefinitely. The moment I saw the daguerreotype of the Whitmore sisters, Cooper later testified, I knew we had identified our victims. The resemblance was unmistakable. 3 beautiful young women with the same heart-shaped faces, high cheekbones, and most notably, extraordinarily long, dark hair that their uncle mentioned was a point of family pride for generations. The 3 sisters, Catherine, Elizabeth, and Margaret Whitmore, had indeed travelled to Savannah in August 1893 to visit their mother's cousin, Josephine Hargrove, widow of Thaddeus Hargrove's son, William. According to the original investigation, they had arrived safely and stayed at the Hargrove estate for approximately 2 weeks before supposedly continuing their journey. No one had seen or heard from them since, except for the suspicious letter received by their uncle. With the victims identified, attention turned to establishing a timeline and identifying potential suspects. The most obvious connection was to the Hargrove family, particularly Josephine Hargrove and her daughter Eleanor, who had been the last known residents of the estate. Court records show that investigators struggled to locate either woman. Josephine Hargrove had reportedly moved to Europe following her daughter's disappearance in 1891, but inquiries through diplomatic channels failed to locate her in any of the cities where she was thought to have settled. Eleanor Hargrove's disappearance, previously attributed to her running away with an unsuitable suitor, now took on a more sinister aspect in light of the recent discoveries. As investigators delved deeper into the history of the Hargrove family, they began to uncover disturbing patterns. William Hayes, who had become increasingly invested in solving the mystery, took it upon himself to interview older residents of Savannah who had known the family. His unofficial notes, discovered among his personal effects after his death in 1922, contained accounts that never made it into official reports. One particularly troubling interview was with Margaret Sullivan, who had served as a housemaid at the Hargrove estate from 1870 through 1888. Mrs. Sullivan was reluctant to speak at first, Hayes wrote, but eventually opened up after I assured her the information was for a private inquiry. She told me the Hargrove women had always been different. According to her, both Josephine and her daughter Eleanor practiced what she called the old ways, rituals performed in the basement of the house on nights of the full moon. Sullivan claimed to have witnessed one such ritual in 1886, seeing Josephine and a teenage Eleanor standing within a circle drawn on the floor, surrounded by candles, chanting in a language she didn't recognize. Most disturbing was Sullivan's account of the numerous young women who were invited to stay at the estate over the years. Beautiful girls would come to visit, she told me, always with remarkable hair, long, thick, lustrous. Mrs. Hargrove would speak of their potential in private conversations with Eleanor. After these visits, Mrs. Hargrove would often travel for several weeks, returning with expensive gifts for Eleanor and new, strange items that were taken directly to the basement. When I asked if any of these visitors had ever returned for second visits, Sullivan became visibly distressed and said, "None that I ever saw, sir. Not a one." She then refused to speak further on the matter and asked me to leave. Hayes's notes contained similar accounts from other former staff members, all hinting at unusual practices within the household and a particular interest in young women with exceptional hair. Several mentioned a room in the basement that staff were forbidden to enter, described as Josephine's private study. Based on these accounts, Sheriff Wilkins obtained a warrant to excavate the basement of the Hargrove estate. The excavation began on June 15th and quickly yielded results that expanded the scope of the investigation significantly. Beneath a section of recently laid concrete flooring, workers discovered a hidden chamber approximately 15 feet square. Unlike the rest of the basement, This room had been finished with wood paneling and contained shelves lined with dozens of books, jars of unidentified substances, and various instruments of unknown purpose. Dr. Edwin Morris, a professor of anthropology from Emory University who was brought in to examine the findings, identified many of the books as rare texts on various esoteric subjects, including several dealing with ancient preservation techniques and so-called sympathetic magic, practices based on the belief that a connection exists between similar objects that can influence one another even at a distance. Many of these volumes are exceedingly rare, Morris noted in his report. Some I believed to exist only as rumors among collectors. They represent a comprehensive collection of works on what might be termed practical immortality, methods by which practitioners believed human life could be extended beyond natural limits through various rituals and procedures. The most significant discovery, however, was a leather-bound journal found inside a locked drawer in a desk positioned at the center of the room. The journal, written in Josephine Hargrove's distinctive hand, contained detailed accounts of experiments spanning over 20 years, from 1873 to 1894. State Attorney Richard Palmer, who led the prosecution's investigation, would later describe the journal as the most disturbing document I have encountered in my 30 years of legal practice. Only portions were ever made public, with the majority deemed too horrific or potentially instructive in criminal methods to release. The passages that were made available revealed Josephine Hargrove's obsession with extending her youth and beauty indefinitely. Early entries detailed her research into various historical accounts of preservation and rejuvenation, from Egyptian mummification techniques to the Hungarian Countess Elizabeth Bathory's alleged bathing in the blood of virgins. As the journal progressed, the entries became increasingly detailed and disturbing, documenting experiments Josephine conducted initially on animals, and later, it appeared, on human subjects. She wrote of harvesting vital essences from suitable donors and transferring these essences to herself and later to her daughter through elaborate rituals that combined physical procedures with ceremonial elements. A particularly chilling entry dated September 3, 1893, shortly after the Whitmore sisters' visit began, read, "Providence has blessed us beyond measure with the arrival of C, E, and M. Never have I encountered such perfect vessels, young, vital, and possessing the most remarkable hair I have ever seen. The power contained within such tresses, grown over their entire lifetimes without cutting, is incalculable. Eleanor agrees they are ideal for the grand working. Preparations are nearly complete. The alignment occurs in 3 days' time. After decades of research and smaller workings, we stand at the threshold of true immortality." The final entry, dated September 7, 1893, was brief but triumphant. "It is done. The essence transfer was successful beyond all expectations. He shows remarkable improvement already. As for myself, I feel a vitality I have not known in 20 years. The vessels have been properly preserved as conduits. So long as the connection remains unbroken, the flow will continue indefinitely. My only regret is that we did not attempt this sooner." There were no further entries in the journal. Based on this evidence, investigators developed a theory. Josephine and Eleanor Hargrove had lured the Whitmore sisters to their estate with the specific intention of using them in some sort of ritual designed to transfer their youth or life force. After murdering the sisters, they had preserved the bodies and arranged them in the ritualistic manner discovered in the trunk, believing this would create an ongoing transfer of essence from the victims to themselves. But this theory raised as many questions as it answered. If the Hargroves had killed the Whitmore sisters in 1893, why had Eleanor disappeared in 1891? And if Josephine had fled to Europe, why leave behind such incriminating evidence? The investigation took an even more bizarre turn when forensic examination of the trunk and its contents was completed. Dr. Thornton's final report contained several details that defied conventional explanation. Upon closer examination, I have determined that the method of preservation used on the victims involved both chemical and other unknown processes. The bodies have been drained of blood and injected with a solution containing various compounds I cannot fully identify with current methods. More unusually, the binding of the victims with their own hair appears to serve some function beyond the symbolic or decorative. The hair shows signs of remarkable preservation, and what I can only describe as a continuing vitality not consistent with hair taken from deceased individuals. When separated from the scalp for testing, samples continue to exhibit properties more consistent with living tissue than dead matter. Even more disturbing was Dr. Thornton's observation about the relative ages of the victims. Based on detailed examination, I must revise my initial estimate of time since death. Contrary to appearances, tissue samples indicate these individuals have been deceased for approximately 15 years, not 10 as previously estimated. This would place their deaths around 1891, not 1893 as suggested by witness accounts of their visit. This timeline contradiction puzzled investigators until Deputy Cooper made a connection that would take the case in an entirely new direction. Reviewing records of Eleanor Hargrove's disappearance in 1891, he discovered a detail previously overlooked. Eleanor had last been seen by the family's gardener on the evening of June 21st, the summer solstice. The gardener reported seeing Eleanor walking toward the woods at the edge of the property, accompanied by 3 young women he didn't recognize, all with remarkably long, dark hair. "I didn't think much of it at the time," the gardener had told investigators in 1891. "Miss Eleanor often had friends visiting from out of town. These 3 looked to be sisters, all dressed alike in white dresses. I assumed they were guests of the family." No record existed of any official visitors to the Hargrove estate during that period. The implication was startling. The Whitmore sisters, or 3 women matching their description, had been at the estate in 1891, 2 years before their official visit in 1893. This discovery led to a re-examination of the Whitmore sisters' background. Harold Whitmore was contacted again and questioned more thoroughly about his nieces. Under persistent questioning, he eventually revealed information he had previously withheld. "The girls were not exactly as I represented them," he admitted in a sworn statement. "They came to live with me following the death of my sister in 1888. From the beginning, there was something unusual about them. They were beautiful, yes, with their remarkable hair and identical features despite being born a year apart. But they possessed knowledge no young women of their age and station should have had. They spoke languages I didn't recognize and sometimes seemed to communicate without words. Most disturbing was their apparent lack of aging. In the 5 years they lived in my home, they showed no signs of growing older." When asked why he had not mentioned these unusual characteristics before, Whitmore responded, "Who would have believed me? And more importantly, who would have helped me find them if they thought them to be unnatural in some way? I loved my nieces, whatever their peculiarities. I only wanted them returned safely." The investigation now faced an almost incomprehensible scenario. Either there were 2 sets of identical triplets with remarkably similar features, or something far stranger was occurring. The possibility that the Whitmore sisters had somehow been involved with the Hargroves as early as 1891, had perhaps been killed at that time, and yet had somehow also been alive to visit officially in 1893, seemed impossible. Further complications arose when investigators attempted to verify the Whitmore sisters' history prior to their time in Charleston. Records of their birth in a small town in West Virginia existed, but when agents traveled there to interview locals, they found that no one recalled a family with 3 identical daughters. The house where they supposedly grew up had burned down in 1879, destroying any physical evidence of their existence there. As the investigation continued through the summer of 1906, pressure mounted on the authorities from unexpected directions. Several prominent families in Savannah, including the Forsyths, the Merrimans, and the Calhouns, filed legal motions to have the investigation sealed from public view, citing potential damage to community standards and public morale. These same families made substantial donations to various political campaigns and charitable foundations associated with the judge overseeing the case. On August 10th, Judge Clarence Holbrook ordered the investigation classified and removed from public record, citing interests of public welfare and moral standards. Sheriff Wilkins was instructed to conclude the investigation quietly, and all physical evidence, including the trunk and its contents, was to be transferred to a secure location under state authority. Not everyone involved was willing to abandon the case so easily. William Hayes, convinced that a grave injustice was being covered up, continued his private investigation. His notes from this period reveal a man becoming increasingly paranoid. August 15, 1906. I am being followed. Today marks the third time I've spotted the same man watching my house. When approached, he quickly walks away. I've informed Sheriff Wilkins, but he seems unconcerned and suggests I am overworked and imagining things. August 22, 1906, received a visit today from Clarence Merriman, whose family was among those pushing to have the case sealed. He offered me a considerable sum to put this unfortunate business behind us. When I refused, his manner changed. There are matters at work here beyond your understanding, Mr. Hayes, he told me, forces that should not be disturbed. For your own safety and that of your family, I strongly advise you to forget what you've seen. August 29, 1906. Have made contact with Professor Morris from Emory. He's been removed from his position under mysterious circumstances, but has agreed to meet me in Atlanta next week to discuss his theories about the Hargrove case. He claims to have made connections between this incident and similar occurrences dating back over a century. Hayes's meeting with Professor Morris never took place. On September 2nd, Morris was found dead in his office at Emory, the apparent victim of a heart attack despite being only 42 and in good health. Hayes himself reported being followed more aggressively in the days after Morris's death, culminating in an attempt to break into his home on the night of September 5th. In his final journal entry, dated September 7th, exactly 13 years to the day after Josephine Hargrove's last journal entry, Hayes wrote, "I can no longer remain in Savannah. The threat is too immediate, and the authorities cannot or will not provide protection. I've sent copies of my notes and findings to colleagues in New York and Chicago, along with instructions to publish everything should anything happen to me. Tomorrow I depart for Richmond to stay with my brother while I determine my next steps. Before leaving, I intend to make one final visit to the Hargrove estate. There is a section of the basement we never fully excavated due to the judge's order. Based on the house plans I've studied, there should be another chamber beyond the ritual room we discovered. I believe whatever is in that chamber may explain what truly happened to Eleanor Hargrove, and possibly Josephine as well." Hayes never reached Richmond. His carriage was discovered abandoned on the road north of Savannah on September 8th. Despite an extensive search, his body was never found. The official report listed him as missing presumed deceased, and attributed his disappearance to possible criminal elements related to his work as a foreman. The Hargrove case was officially closed on September 15, 1906. All evidence was transferred to state custody, and a formal declaration was issued stating that no conclusive determination of criminal activity can be established due to the age of the remains and lack of definitive evidence regarding responsible parties. Franklin Mercer, perhaps sensing the dangerous undercurrents surrounding the property, sold the Hargrove estate at a significant loss in October 1906. The buyer, interestingly, was a corporation called Meridian Holdings, which investigation would later reveal was owned jointly by the Merriman, Forsyth, and Calhoun families. The same prominent Savannah families that had pushed to have the investigation sealed. For decades, the Hargrove case remained buried, known only to a few individuals who had been directly involved. The estate itself was never renovated as originally planned. Instead, it was maintained minimally, unoccupied except for a caretaker who lived in a small cottage on the grounds. In 1954, a history graduate student named Thomas Blackwood from the University of Georgia stumbled upon references to the case while researching another topic in state archives. His subsequent investigation led to the discovery of Hayes's journal, which had been preserved among the personal effects of Hayes's brother following his death. Blackwood's research paper, Suppressed History: The Hargrove Estate Murders and Institutional Cover-Up, caused a brief stir in academic circles but gained little public attention. Within months of its publication, the paper was removed from university archives due to factual inaccuracies, and Blackwood himself left academia to take a position with a private research foundation in Europe. In 1972, during renovations of the Chatham County Records Building, workers discovered a sealed room containing evidence from the Hargrove case that had never been transferred to state custody as ordered. Among the items was a small wooden box containing 3 locks of extraordinarily long hair labeled as samples taken from the Whitmore sisters during the initial investigation. Dr. Margaret Chen, a forensic pathologist with the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, conducted tests on the samples and documented some unusual findings. The hair samples, despite being separated from their owners for over 66 years, display none of the degradation one would expect. Under microscopic examination, the cellular structure appears remarkably vital, almost as though the samples were recently taken from living individuals rather than long-deceased corpses. Following her report, the samples and Dr. Chen's findings were classified, and she was reassigned to another department. When contacted by journalists years later, she refused to discuss the matter, saying only, "Some things are better left undisturbed." The Hargrove estate remained standing until 1989, when it was destroyed by a fire of unknown origin. Firefighters reported unusual difficulties in extinguishing the blaze, which seemed to reignite repeatedly despite their efforts. By morning, nothing remained but charred foundations. In the ashes, investigators discovered the entrance to a previously unknown sub-basement that had apparently been sealed for decades. Due to structural instability, only a cursory examination was possible before the site was condemned and filled in. The few photographs taken show a circular chamber with unusual symbols carved into the stone walls and floor, and what appeared to be 3 stone slabs arranged in a triangle at the center. The land remained vacant until 2004, when it was purchased by Crescent Development Corporation for the construction of a gated community called Hargrove Estates. During initial excavation, workers reported finding numerous small objects, hairpins, buttons, and personal items, suggesting the area had been used as a burial ground at some point. A required archaeological survey was conducted, but its findings were never made public, and construction proceeded after a brief delay. Residents of the new community have reported various unusual phenomena since moving in: unexplained sounds, electrical disturbances, and most commonly, dreams of 3 beautiful women with extraordinarily long hair who whisper incomprehensible messages to the sleepers. These reports are generally dismissed as urban legends or the power of suggestion related to knowledge of the property's history. More difficult to dismiss are the medical statistics. A study conducted in 2019 by the Centers for Disease Control found that residents of Hargrove Estates have a 40% higher rate of rare autoimmune disorders than the general population, and women living in the community report hair loss at nearly 3 times the national average. Perhaps most disturbing are the 3 cases documented between 2010 and 2018 of young women from the community who disappeared while reportedly sleepwalking. Each was eventually found miles away with no memory of how they had gotten there, and each had experienced sudden, dramatic hair growth as much as 12 inches in a single night. All three subsequently moved away from the area, and attempts to contact them for follow-up studies have been unsuccessful. In 2022, during routine sewer maintenance in downtown Savannah, workers discovered a sealed chamber beneath the former site of the Merriman family home, which had been demolished in the 1960s. Inside was a collection of documents preserved in airtight containers that appeared to date from the early 1900s. Among them was a letter signed by representatives of the Merriman, Forsyth, and Calhoun families, addressed to Josephine Hargrove and dated August 1894, nearly a year after her last journal entry. The letter, now held in a private collection and seen by only a few researchers, reportedly contains references to our mutual arrangement and the continuation of the work, along with assurances that suitable vessels will be provided as needed. It concludes with a phrase that has taken on an ominous significance in light of the continuing strange occurrences. Though faces and names may change, the great work continues through the generations. The three sisters ensure our prosperity and longevity so long as the binding holds. The most recent chapter in this dark saga began in 2023, when Dr. Rachel Morgan, a geneticist specializing in epigenetic inheritance patterns, moved into one of the newer homes in Hargrove Estates. Unaware of the property's history, she was drawn by the affordable prices and proximity to her new position at Memorial Health University Medical Center. Within weeks of moving in, Morgan began experiencing vivid dreams featuring three women with impossibly long hair who seemed to be trying to communicate something urgent. Initially dismissing these as stress-related, her scientific curiosity was piqued when she noticed her own hair growing at an accelerated rate, nearly an inch per week. "I've always been a rational person," Morgan wrote in her research journal. "But when you observe biological impossibilities in your own body, you have to consider even the most unlikely explanations. My hair has grown 7 inches in 7 weeks. Lab tests show unusual cellular activity I cannot explain through any known scientific mechanism." Morgan's investigation led her to historical records of the Hargrove case. Using her professional connections, she gained access to sealed medical files related to the 1906 discovery. What she found challenged her understanding of biology and inheritance. The DNA samples preserved from the three sisters show unprecedented properties, she noted. Their genetic material exhibits a form of quantum entanglement I've only seen theorized in speculative papers. More disturbing is that when compared to samples taken from residents of Hargrove Estates who reported unusual symptoms, there are markers suggesting genetic transfer across generations, as if fragments of the sisters' DNA have somehow incorporated themselves into these unrelated individuals. Morgan's research took a darker turn when she discovered that several prominent families in Savannah, direct descendants of the Merrimans, Forsyths, and Calhouns, showed similar genetic anomalies. These families had maintained their wealth, influence, and unusual longevity across generations, despite periodic financial crises that devastated their contemporaries. The average lifespan within these family lines exceeds the national average by 23 years, Morgan documented. Even more telling, they show remarkably few signs of aging until very late in life. Their hair remains unnaturally vital and free of graying until well into their 80s. The statistical probability of this occurring naturally across multiple family lines for over a century is effectively zero. As Morgan delved deeper, she began noticing subtle surveillance of her activities. Unmarked vehicles parked near her home, evidence of tampering with her mail and unusual interference on her phone lines. Colleagues who had initially been helpful in providing access to records suddenly became unavailable or denied previous conversations. In February 2024, Morgan received an unexpected visitor, Eleanor Phillips, a frail woman claiming to be 97 years old, though appearing no older than 70. Phillips identified herself as a distant relative of the Calhoun family who had become disillusioned with family practices. "They won't let me die," Phillips told Morgan during their recorded conversation. "None of us can truly die while the binding remains intact. The sisters feed us their essence, and we feed them our worship. It's a cycle that has continued for over a century." According to Phillips, the three preserved sisters, whom she referred to only as the vessels, had never been truly dead. Their bodies had been subjected to a ritual that transformed them into conduits for what Phillips called vital energy, that flowed continuously to those connected to the ritual through bloodlines or participation. The three were chosen for their unique genetic traits, Phillips explained. They possessed a rare mutation that allowed their life force to be channeled without being depleted. Josephine discovered this through years of experimentation and recognized it in Eleanor Hargrove as well. That's why Eleanor disappeared in 1891. She was being prepared as the next vessel when something went wrong. The Whitmore sisters were brought in as replacements. Most disturbing was Phillips' claim that the ritual had never been disrupted, despite the discovery in 1906. The trunk had been merely one component of a larger working. "They moved the sisters that night, before investigators could return. The bodies you found were decoys, preserved through conventional means to throw off the investigation. The real vessels remain where they've been since the original binding, continuously feeding the families through an umbilical of hair that connects us all." 3 days after this meeting, Phillips was found dead in her apartment, apparently from natural causes. Morgan, increasingly concerned for her safety, compiled her findings onto encrypted drives and sent copies to trusted colleagues across the country. On April 14th, Morgan disappeared from her home in Hargrove Estates. Police investigation revealed no signs of forced entry or struggle. Her vehicle remained in the garage, and her passport and financial accounts were untouched. The only unusual element was a substantial amount of long, dark hair found on her bedroom floor. Hair that DNA testing would later confirm did not match Morgan's genetic profile. 2 weeks after her disappearance, Morgan's colleagues at various institutions simultaneously received packages containing thumb drives and handwritten notes. The contents, partially redacted by authorities, outlined her discoveries and theories about the Hargrove case. Her final note read, "If you're reading this, I have likely become another footnote in this horrible story. The connections run deeper than I initially believed. The Merriman, Forsyth, and Calhoun descendants occupy key positions throughout local government, law enforcement, and healthcare systems. They have maintained their power through what I can only describe as parasitic immortality, drawing life force from the bound sisters to extend their own lives unnaturally. Most terrifying is my discovery that the binding works in both directions. The sisters are not merely victims, but willing participants who have gained a form of immortality themselves. They cannot die while the binding exists, and they feed on the collective experiences and energies of the descendants. It's a symbiotic relationship that has perpetuated itself across generations. I believe I know where they're keeping them. The original Hargrove property includes a natural cave system that extends beneath the current development. Historical records show the caves were sealed off in the 1860s after several disappearances, but Josephine Hargrove's journals contain references to the lower chambers, where the boundaries between worlds grow thin. Tomorrow, I plan to locate the entrance through the old well house that still stands on the property. If I don't return, please ensure this information reaches people who can expose the truth. The binding must be broken, not just for the sake of the victims they'll continue to claim, but because whatever the sisters have become over these decades of unnatural existence is no longer human. The investigation into Morgan's disappearance was officially closed after 6 months, with no conclusion. Her notes were classified as delusional ramblings resulting from mental health issues, despite her previous history of perfect mental stability. In January 2025, 3 new families moved into Hargrove Estates, each with a daughter in her late teens. Neighbors reported that all 3 girls possessed remarkably similar features and unusually long dark hair. When questioned about the coincidence, each family gave identical responses. "We were drawn to this community. It felt like coming home." Construction has recently begun on a community wellness center in the center of the development, funded jointly by the Merriman, Forsyth and Calhoun Foundations. The architectural plans include an unusually large basement level that extends deep into the bedrock, with a central chamber designed in a triangular configuration. The official cornerstone-laying ceremony took place on September 7th. Exactly 131 years after Josephine Hargrove's final journal entry. Attendees reported an unusual phenomenon during the event. As the sun set, 3 distinct shadows appeared to extend from the cornerstone, though there was nothing nearby that could have cast them. Local resident Michael Torres captured the moment on his phone. The video, which briefly circulated on social media before being removed for community standard violations, shows 3 elongated shadows stretching across the ground, merging and intertwining like braided hair. Those who viewed the video reported an unsettling detail visible in the final frames. The shadows appeared to be moving independently, reaching toward the gathered crowd as if seeking connection. Most disturbing were the 3 faint faces that seemed to form within the darkness, their expressions captured in a moment between agony and ecstasy. The development continues to grow, with property values rising despite the occasional disappearance of young women in the area. New residents report being attracted by the community's unusual vitality and the strange dreams that leave them feeling inexplicably rejuvenated. And beneath it all, in chambers older than the city itself, 3 sisters remain bound by their own hair, neither living nor dead, feeding and being fed upon in an endless cycle. Their influence spreads with each new home built atop their domain, with each new family that joins the community, with each strand of hair that grows unnaturally long and vital. For in Savannah, as in many old southern cities, true power flows through bloodlines, and some bloodlines are maintained through practices best left unexplored. The truly terrible truth is not that such horrors existed in our past, but that they continue into our present, hiding behind respectable facades and modern sensibilities. So the next time you find yourself drawn to a new community that feels inexplicably like coming home, or notice your hair growing with unusual vitality, or dream of 3 beautiful women with impossibly long tresses who whisper promises of longevity and prosperity, remember the Sisters of Savannah, for the binding that began in 1893 has never been broken.